Welcome to the Performance Portfolio Podcast with Coop and Coop. Greg Cooper is the owner of Cooper Performance Coaching and lead instructor at Kodakwai Judo Club in Edmonton, Alberta. He is on the lifelong pursuit of helping others increase their performance. Cooper Allen is a top financial advisor from Barrie, Ontario, whose focus is empowering everyday families with advice, leadership, and tools that we should have been given in school. Together, they bridge the gap between performance and finance to help you create your own robust performance portfolio. With that, let's get into today's episode.
Coop, you just got back from a huge event. I know I was talking to you and your team, a lot of big takeaways, and that's what we're talking about today. So what's the feeling coming fresh out of that, and what were those key takeaways for you?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking. And for the sake of the listeners, I'll speak to the stuff that's not specifically related to financial services, uh, more kind of things that they can take and apply it to their own life, their health, their fitness, their growth, their development, whatever they're looking at doing. But uh, just to answer your first question, I mean, overarching feeling is we've always done, I think, a really good job of building something that's bigger than money and bigger than finance. And it was a reminder to me this weekend of how needed it is in society for people to be in environments like that. Because I know there was a lot of spouses in the room this weekend that are not involved in our business. Uh, but a lot of their feedback was, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that will allow me to be a better father and husband or wife and mother or things like that. And one guy I chatted with that came as a guest is a police officer. And he's like, yeah, there was some stuff that was woo-woo and Kool-Aid-ish that wouldn't fly at the department. But he's like, there's a lot of stuff that was just a healthy perspective of when I go home and I think the world is all doom and gloom. Like it's nice to see some people excited about their lives and thinking about things the right way. And the other thing he said that was pretty funny is he's like, I just spent 2 days in an environment where I never heard any reference to Trump or Carney. And he's like, that's probably the first time in a long time where that was a thing.
That is a rarity in today's world. Wow, what a statement.
Yeah. It was cool to hear. And he said it and it just like it caught me like that's so true. And regardless, I think of your politics, wouldn't it be nice to get back to a society where it just wasn't the forefront of everybody's identity and everybody's thought process? So, but yeah, a couple things, Greg. I'll start off with one, and this will be the only one that is kind of more specific to our business because it's not just our business. I mean, you've been in sales in the past and know a ton of people that are in the sales space. So the first thing that's a little bit more technical is just a summary of the difference between average producers and high producers. And this could be real estate, it could be mortgages, it could be farm equipment. It doesn't really matter what it is. But the difference is high producers, they run more volume. They actually care. They're a student of the industry that they're in. Number four is that they have consistency, some sort of daily five, power list, big three. Number five is they ask for referrals from everyone consistently. And number six is they build relationships. So yes, we were talking about that in the concept of finance, but Greg, I'd be curious to hear your perspective on how those core six you think apply to other industries as well.
I mean, we talk about high performance all the time. It's what I do. It's what I've rooted my business around. And those things, although yes, are more worded for the sales world, the financial world, it's the same thing no matter what you do. As an athlete, are you a student of the game? Do you understand the playbook? Do you understand the psychology of your sport? Do you understand what the other team's thinking, doing? Are you consistent? Do you work out when you say you're going to work out? Is your nutrition dialed? Are you networking? Are you finding mentors and experts, sports psychologists? Are you doing all these things? Are you getting reps in? Like all of these things are so interchangeable. That's the athlete side. You could say the same thing for a stay-at-home mom. Like, right? Like my mom wasn't a stay-at-home mom, but my mom's one of the greatest moms in the world. She was consistently there for us. We'd always have the decorations for every season. We'd have the baking. She showed the same love to everybody. Like everybody was welcome in our home because she was a high producing mom, right? Like all of these things are interchangeable. You just have to take the phrase and stop viewing it from this tunnel vision of, well, that's sales. That's not relevant to me. Sure, if you view it like that, but you can flip these things. A high performer is a high performer, or high producer equals high performer. Same thing. So all those six things interchangeable, no matter what area, what field of play you're in, for sure.
Yeah, I appreciate the perspective on that. It's probably my favorite thing to do is to just find ways to make things relatable. Because if it's all about your world all the time, then you're never going to learn anything. And you're always going to wonder, well, how do I meet people? There's that old saying, be interested, not interesting. Well, if you aren't interested, or even if you are, you're not even going to know the right questions to ask if you're not thinking about, well, how do I contextualize what I'm learning in a sales role or a coaching role or an advising role? Uh, how does that apply to someone who is a stay-at-home mom or someone who is a real estate agent or somebody who is an athlete or so. Yeah, I love that stuff.
That's why we started the podcast, right? Like we wanted to bridge that gap. Your world of finance, my world of, sports, high performance, and bridge that. How do we mend the two? Because you and I would have, when we, right from the first time we ever met, we started doing that. That was how we talked. That's how we flowed. And then over time, we've become very good friends. And now it's like, let's bridge this gap. So it's simple enough to do. It's not always easy to see the path.
Absolutely. The second one, and I'm just looking through my notes here, obviously, because we're doing this episode on the fly. Uh, I think you'll really like this, Greg. It was Holbrook did a talk around uh, the steps that you need to take to basically make sure that uh, that you're aligned with where you're going. And so his points, the first point was one, have a clear vision. Uh, Sub points were if there's no vision, you're either going to do nothing or you're going to burn out. And I want to talk about the burnout one for a minute and kind of just as some of my follow-up thoughts from that talk is yes, we've understood from the beginning of time where, and it's a biblical principle for where there is no vision, the people perish. So the do nothing makes a ton of sense. If you don't have a goal that you're chasing, then you're not really chasing anything. I think that's a pretty easy thing to understand. The one that really hit me between the eyes though is how many people are just working hard right now with no idea if the hard work is going to pay off. Or no idea if that hard work is going to be worth it or not. They were raised in a house where like grandpa was blue collar, dad was blue collar, so now I'm blue collar, and it's just what we do. We just pull our socks on when we pull our boots up and strap in and go to work, and it's all grunt and grit and tons of respect for those people. But with no vision, that hard work leads to burnout. It leads to the starting to have beers after work instead of going home to your family, or the cigarettes, or the gambling, or the drugs, and the the anxiety of am I doing enough as a man? And so yeah, that was a big one for me is just action without alignment, creating burnout and uncertainty and anxiety. What are some of your thoughts on that?
The lot, the first thing that popped into my head is the blue collar. And this is just a thought. I could be very wrong on this, but I'm going to assume that I'm at least 20% correct. The blue collar family. Grandpa was a tradesman, dad was a tradesman, so I'm a tradesman, and we just work hard and that's what we do. Now, there's an asterisk there. Because if you're the third generation of that blue collar job and you're just grinding away and you're not saving anything, you got a big fancy truck you paid cash for, all this stuff, we know the type. I've seen many people like that. Everybody has. But their grandpa has a nice property, a lake house. Their dad has all this stuff as well. So that means the grandpa and the dad had a vision, but they just came from a generation that didn't talk about this stuff. It was implied. Grandpa knew that he had to do what he needed to do to secure the future for the family. Dad knew he needed to do what he needed to do to secure the future for the family. But it was never talked about in those households. It wasn't even talked about in white collar households at the time, depending on the generation and the part of the world where your parents potentially immigrated from. You come from an old school English family, that wasn't talked about until maybe your dad had like an epiphany day where he was like, oh God, this is why I never had any conversations with my dad. We didn't talk. And typically the grandpa was never home because he was out working. So there was vision in some of those scenarios, but it just was never expressed. And then because of that, it's now created a loop of just like, yeah, hard work, not hard work with vision, to your point.
Yeah, wow. I never really thought of it that way, but it is so true. And I guess that's where this stuff becomes less Kool-Aid and more important for the new generation is that whole hard times create strong men quote that we've heard a bunch of times that creates that cycle is that the vision before was more just, I got to do what I got to do for my family. I got to take my family from lower middle class or lower class to lower middle class. I got to take my family from lower middle class to middle class. Now the vision is okay, if you're already middle class or maybe even upper middle class, well, how do I continue to protect and provide, but maybe do it from a space that's happier and healthier and more fulfilled? How do I do it from a space that's where there is more communication? Do it from a space where maybe the things that you're chasing are not as materialistic, but you're asking, and one of the points from that talk was don't ask what you want from life, ask who you're becoming, which is a lot easier to do when grandpa and when dad have already set the foundation. Another point, Greg, I thought of that wasn't from the event, but that I've always kind of held it in my brain a little bit is there's a lot of talk in our country right now of, well, immigrants only get ahead because they just get all these handouts from the government. And for me, that completely aside, whether that's legit, whether that's not legit, I just think that a lot of these immigrants, generally speaking, work harder and work smarter. And I believe that they're motivated to work harder and work smarter because they're closer to the source of sacrifice. The reason that a lot of our grandparents worked a lot harder than our current generation is because at one point in time, them or they saw themselves or they saw their parents migrate, or they heard stories of their parents or their grandparents migrating. You get 3, 4, 5 generations removed from that, and whether it's migration or whether it's people fighting in a war for our freedoms, either one, or let's take immigration out of it. Let's just take fighting for us to have the freedom to have the opinions that we have online. Now, um, the further you get away from the sources of sacrifice, the less you appreciate them, the less motivation you have to work hard and fulfill the duty of what those sacrifices were even for in the first place. So yeah, if you looked and your dad came new to a country with $1 in his pocket and left all of his family back home to create a better life, well, then by the time that you get brought over, you're probably going to work a lot harder than Silver Spoon Cooper Allen, who has no idea how hard his grandparents worked to take his family out of poverty because he's never bothered asking.
Yeah, get some perspective, Coop. Come on. um, yeah, I completely agree. And this is where, something I often say is, yeah, history is important. In school, it might be the most boring thing we learn, but your history is important. Your family's history is important. Replicate what worked and evolve that to work for today's era and ensure to avoid the things that went catastrophically wrong. My grandparents came here after World War II from what only the stories that we've heard left us shock and awe. of what they had to go through as young kids. You know, my great uncle essentially became the father figure at 12 because Opa was in the war, was captured, right? All this stuff. And they came in, that's all they knew. And to the, people in Canada specifically that, didn't have, weren't immigrants that were already in Canada, a lot of their friends were immigrants and they saw this work ethic. And then it was transferred that way. And I think, not to make this too political or geopolitical, that is one of the things that makes me so angry about today's society, especially the Caucasian side of things. We look at immigrants and we use the worst examples possible as the baseline. But the people that are doing that, I challenge them. Have you ever talked to a successful entrepreneur or a successful business owner or a happy's not the right word, but just somebody who is contributing that's an immigrant? The answer is going to be no every time because they view them as these stereotypes that you see ignorant memes about, and then they all get labeled that, and it just makes me so angry because I in the sport of judo, we are a sport of immigrants. Our sport is international, so we attract a lot of new Canadians, a lot of people that are second generation Canadian, third generation Canadian, that aren't white Caucasian. And I love that about our sport. And it gives everybody more perspective. But, just really quick on that, if your baseline for something is the stereotype of that thing, challenge yourself to go talk to the opposite of that stereotype in that group. And then ask yourself if you are correct in making that assumption. Because you're going to say, wow, boy, was I being an ignorant blank, insert bad word. Anyway, sorry, just wanted to get that off my chest because it's really disheartening when the view of the world in general, which is a gross generalization, I realize, is that it's the stereotype of those groups. So, yeah, having that hard work, having that vision and the knowledge of what came and what came before you is so important.
Yeah, I completely agree. On that point too, Greg, of conclusions that people jump to, ties well into the next thing I wanted to bring up. Uh, we had a different speaker talk a lot about self-talk, but not through the lens of kind of like the foo-foo, pom-pom self-talk. It was actually very tangible, very practical, at least the most practical I had ever heard uh, the idea of self-talk spoken in. And it talked about how the fact that your subconscious mind is 5 years old. So you think of talking to a 5-year-old, they will believe, if they respect you enough, they will believe whatever you tell them. And it's the same thing with your subconscious is you can tell it whatever you want to tell it, whether it's true or not. And eventually, if you just tell yourself that enough times, you will believe it to be true. And the reason that you and I, Greg, know that to be true is right now, I would say it's not even 10% and 10% anymore. I'd say it's like 30% and 30% on each side, where it used to be like you'd have the 10% extreme on the left, the 10% extreme on the right, and 80% of us were all in the middle. I think we're now like the 10%, call it whatever you want, evil, devil, whatever, has drug another 20% of people their side, and same thing, another 20% on the opposite side. And you've got like 40% of people left that they might lean right, they might lean left, but they're just like kind of in the middle with compassion, with empathy, willing to see both sides, just want a better community, want a better world. And you look at 60% of the demographic of the world, and you could have Greg Cooper say it, and they love it because Greg said it. And then you could have Cooper Allen say it, the exact same thing, and they hate it because Cooper Allen said it. And they're basing their entire opinion based on who said it and not what was said. Or they're outraged by something that the same thing happened a week ago and they weren't outraged, but a certain news outlet, right or left, told them that they needed to be mad about it. So to me, that's proof, and that's more politically than it is performance or financial. But to me, that's proof that you can condition your mind to be outraged or excited about whatever you want. And so many people condition it on the negative. What if we just conditioned it on the positive? What if I had a guy who's in his mid 30s the other day define himself as an old fat guy? I was like, dude, are you kidding me? There's 55-year-olds that don't define themselves as old. And you just spoke out into the universe that you're 1 foot in the grave in your mid 30s. And, Ed Milet talked about that in his book, The Power of One More, where one of the analogies he used was the difference between people who lose weight and put it back on versus the people who lose weight and keep it off is identity. It's, were you an athlete that put on weight and now you're just shedding it? Again, is that your identity is, hey, I'm a healthy person or I'm an athlete? Or is your identity the fat guy in the gym? Because if your identity is the fat guy, it doesn't matter how much weight you lose, you're going to put it back on. But if your identity is a healthy person that's just out of shape currently, then you can change that reality. So it's that perspective and self-talk. Two scenarios exactly the same, just different outlook on it, produce different results.
I'm Batman, I'm Batman, I'm Batman, I'm Batman, I'm Batman. So if I say that enough times, it's going to be true, right, Coop?
Not
I,
quite.
I did want to, that was an inappropriate use of humor because I love it. I love that. I often use like the more philosophical, don't speak badly on yourself because the warrior within, hears that as a lesson by it. And that's sometimes very difficult to understand. I could say this to my 7-year-old athletes and they'd understand it, right? Your subconscious is a 5-year-old. And it's so great. And I made the Batman joke because it's that, you put a kid in a Batman shirt and he'll be able to do anything. Until we're told, no, that's impossible. Right. And the same thing in our subconscious. So I love that. And then you using the fitness example, the one thing I look at that pops into my head. I look at some of my older senseis, well into their late 70s, that are still on the mats, that are still out doing cartwheels and flips and doing rounds, and they're high energy all the time. I'm gonna shout out Sensei On from Calgary. This man grew up in Cambodia during a civil war, walked across the country to get out of there. He's seen some things. He's been through a lot of hardships that most people alive today couldn't fathom. And he is the most energetic. This guy, he'll post videos on his Facebook of him kickboxing like he's 30. Like that old fat guy you're talking about, right? But he doesn't look at himself as old. He looks at himself as a young, energetic guy that can still go out and do the thing. And it's the difference between the people that say, yeah, I'm old and fat versus, oh, I'm 70 years young. And it seemed like such like, oh, a cliche thing to say. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But because they've always told themselves that every year, they've never gotten old because, oh, I'm never been this old. I don't know how to act my age. I'm going to go do something fun today. It's such a small thing, but if you're always doing that and you're always using, that positive note, that's what life's going to bring you. But if you're telling yourself that at 30 that your knees are shot and your back is out and you're old and you're, cranky old guy now, okay, you're going to lose that battle. That 5-year-old is now a 95-year-old that is not functional. So you've downgraded your subconscious because of negative self-talk. So yeah, love that. Holbrook,
Here,
what a beauty.
here's the last thing I do want to touch on because this has more of a performance or could have more of a performance lens to it. Because I'm sure when people come to you, whether it's for performance coaching or fitness coaching, there's a reason behind that they didn't just wake up one morning and decide I should give Greg a call. There was something that happened. One of the speakers talked about, says the only way to make change in someone who's over the age of 16 is through a big emotional event or a breakthrough. And it's not about the information that you learn. Most people don't need information to make decisions. It's about the emotional event that drives tangible behavior change. I found that very interesting. And I thought about it actually. I wanted to pick your brain around if I'm out of shape, for example. Typically, I'm probably not coming to you for fitness advice because I just decided one day there was an information package that said, "Hey, here's why being out of shape is not great." Typically, it's probably because I was at the doctor and they said, "Hey, if you don't get your blood pressure down, you're going to reduce your life expectancy," or "Hey, if you don't do X, Y, Z, here's what you're not going to be able to be for your kids," or maybe you have someone in the family who has a heart attack, or times in the financial world where I've had clients reach out to me and go, "Hey, I just want to make sure that my life insurance does have a critical illness component to it because I just had a friend of mine get cancer." Or, "Hey, I'm thinking about increasing my monthly contribution to my TFSA because we just dealt with a family member who uh, needed long-term care and they didn't have enough retirement money left to afford it," or something like that. So, where do you agree with that concept that usually the way to drive change in anyone who's over the age of 16 is typically only really through an emotional breakthrough as opposed to just kind of standard information?
Look, I wouldn't say it's the only reason. Now, I'm going to be very realistic here and pretty blunt. There's maybe 1% of the population that will see a post, that will see a picture, that'll see an ad of an amazing thing and they'll go, yeah. And they're going to put on their shoes and they're going to start running. That's what Nike wants you to do when they say just do it. 1%, maybe 1%'s high. 0.5% of the world's going to accomplish that. Because there was something in them that they just needed that one phrase to unlock them. For most other people, nothing is motivating and nothing creates more action than the reality of mortality. When you realize that tomorrow is not promised, tomorrow isn't even earned. At any point, something could happen and you can die. And this is a real story. You know, my dad had this friend, passed away many years ago, 45 years old. They were on the boat in the middle of summer, beautiful July day, cracked open a beer, cheers to life. And he dropped dead just then of a brain aneurysm. Nothing could have prevented it, nothing could have stopped it. It just happened. And that's life. And when that trauma is around you, there's two things. You either shell up and you're gonna just ball up, hopefully not forever, or you're gonna get really motivated to look in the mirror and go, if that happened to him, he was a pretty healthy guy. Ooh, I can't see my toes. That's gonna create a lot of real shift in how you view yourself and how you view what you're doing in your life. Now, it doesn't need to be that extreme of a emotional pull, but it could be something as simple as losing a relationship because you were getting out of shape and overweight, and you stopped caring about yourself and letting your hygiene slip. Whether you are an extrovert or you present things externally or not, that hurts the ego. That hurts the heart. Somebody left you or never even gave you the opportunity, and you found out it was because you were getting fat, is because you weren't healthy, is because you couldn't go play pickleball with them and not be out of breath after the second rally. That hurts, and that's going to force a change. And it could be financially too, right? Like there's so many things. But when there is a negative thing that really cuts you down, that can be one of the greatest things that ever happened to you. And again, you look at examples like that in the world where downfall, but the comeback, oh, it's sweet. Watch me now. So I'm not saying that's the only way, but how, knowing this information, what could you do today to preempt that? Instead of reacting to that emotion, reacting to that trauma, what could you do to prepare yourself for it to jump ahead and just go, okay, mortality is a real thing, regardless if I have it happen around me, lose someone I love. What can I do today to improve my health and wellness? What can I do today to save more? What could I do today to become a better father? Opposed to waiting for that shock and awe moment.
Totally. One thing I love that you said too is the idea that the setback is probably less important than the actual comeback. And people have a lot of guilt and a lot of shame. I mean, we can do a whole episode on adversity, and we probably will.
I could write a book on it, just on my own life.
For sure. Exactly. And here's my 30 seconds on it for people if they've got guilt or shame attached to it, or maybe they haven't gone through it and that's the reason they're not taking a risk or taking the step that they know they need to take because they're scared of the potential adversity that they might have to go through to get in shape, to build a business, to achieve whatever it is that they're looking to accomplish. Is I'm not impressed by people because they make a ton of money. I'm impressed by people for what they have to overcome. And you don't have to put yourself down. This goes back to the self-talk point, is you don't have to put yourself down to lift yourself up. Like, what if you, instead of putting yourself down to then lift yourself, most people, and I'm guilty of this, I have a very self-deprecating humor. But I've realized that part of that is because some of it's, I like the relatability of it. I'd rather make fun of myself than other people, et cetera, et cetera. But some of it is when I knock myself down a peg, there's like a dopamine hit that comes with picking yourself back up. But what if you just replace that with, I don't have to knock myself down to pick myself up. I'm just going to pick myself up and up and up and up. And I can promise you that whether you make money or whether you don't, whether you lose the weight that you want to or you don't, the right people are going to have respect for you for trying. Because that, to me, that's what leadership is all about, is I just respect people who are willing to get out of their comfort zone. And that's pretty much it. My last challenge, Greg, before I hand it back to you to close us off, is regardless of what your role is, whether you're listening to this as a stay-at-home parent or an entrepreneur, or someone in the performance space, athlete, whoever, it doesn't need to be a Tony Robbins event or an Ed Milet event or anything like that, but maybe go on Eventbrite or go on the event section of Facebook or scroll through social media and find some influencers or whatever. But this year, find an event that you can go to, whether you're with that company or not. I know within our industry, that event this past weekend, we had 500 people at. And at the same time, there was another event going on within our industry that also had another 500 people at it. Ours was in Calgary, theirs was in Toronto. And I'm sure within just our industry, that wasn't the only event going on this weekend. Multiplied out by real estate conferences, multiplied out by mortgage conferences, multiplied out by your network marketing companies who do big conventions, multiplied out by personal development speakers and coaches, and find something that you can go to for a day or two. Ideally somewhere where you can go get a hotel or an Airbnb for a night that gets you out of your environment and into a different one. Because your physiology changes when you're out of your own environment. You're not thinking about the kids or the pets that you have to come back home to. And just put yourself in a situation where maybe for the first time ever, you're just being opened up to a different thinking. And 80% of the time, you might be sitting in this conference going, this couldn't be me, or this is too rah, or this is weird, or this is whatever. But just find the 20% information that you can pull from it, and then take 2 or 3 things from that you can implement in your life right away. And feel the energy of the room. Because if you, for example, go to a real estate conference for a company that you're not even a part of and you're just showing up as a guest, but you look on stage and there's 12 speakers that weekend and 8 of the 12 speakers make over $500,000 a year. That might be the first time that you're in a room where people make that kind of money, other than the people you idolize on TV as athletes and entrepreneurs and things like that. And that was probably the biggest game changer, Greg, for me as I was growing up in business, was realizing that you didn't have to be an elite high performer to make good money,
Mhm.
where you could make 2, 3, 4, 500,000 a year, 1.2 mil, 1.5 mil, whatever, without anybody having a single clue who you are, without needing to be 10 out of 10 mental shape, physical shape, financial shape. But all of those people in that same breath do think about life just a little bit differently. So I would challenge our listeners, go to an event like that just to study, hey, the people who are living a bit better of a life, more fulfilled, better income, things like that, just a bit better of a life than the average person. How do they think differently? And you'll realize that yes, it's a 180, but it's not that far away. It's a few changes to your thought process. It's a few patterns in your day.
Mhm.
Um, and it's transitioning from there's I said one of the things I said in my talk this weekend when I spoke at the event is I said to everyone at the start of the day, I said, there's going to be two types of speakers that you hear from today. The first speaker is the credibility speaker. Man, if they do that, I should do that. If they're involved with this, I should be involved with this. The second type of person you're going to hear from is the hope speaker. Holy crap, if they can do it, we're all going to be rich. There's no way I couldn't do it. And that's what you want to get is you take your information from the credibility speaker where you aspire to be like them. And then the hope speaker is the motivator to go, man, they look like they had way harder conditions than I did. They not only grew up on my side of the tracks, but the side of the tracks that is even way worse than what I had. If they can figure life out, surely I can figure life out. So that would be my challenge to our listeners and just some perspective as well on self-talk and energy and momentum and things of that. So any final thoughts, Greg, before we move things forward to next week?
Yeah, to your point on the networking and going to those events, I think, yeah, it doesn't need to be very big. I'm going to share two of my biggest aha moments as a young professional. I'm 20 years old at the time. First job, and in the process of getting that job, this isn't on the networking side. This is just on, the realization and the misconception of being self-righteous I had. I had gone through, three very traumatic things in my life that put me in a point where I needed to get a job. I had to leave university, and I put down this veil for some reason to this guy who became my first boss, first mentor, and told him everything. And thinking when I finished and I took a breath, I went, oh, what did I just say? I'm never going to get a job. And he goes, man, welcome to the club. Unfortunately, you experienced that stuff at 20 and not later in life. That's really tough. Uh, Man, that must have lent you a lot of perspective. You can start Monday. And he like welcomed me to this club of like, yeah, man, that's life. You learn lessons in life. You've learned a lot of them really quickly, fortunately, unfortunately, and that's okay. See, to me, at the time I didn't really realize it, but now I look back and go, man, wow, that was powerful because yeah, everybody's been through something. The size and scope of it isn't really relevant, but everybody's been through something because to them it might have been massive. To you, it might be small potatoes. But that is a piece of them, and you have to allow that to be a driver for you. Let that be part of your identity, but not your whole identity. Don't make it your personality to be I have this trauma. Don't do that. Use it in a positive factor and know that it's not all about you and about what you've been through. That's part of you. Move on and use that to drive you for better. And then, I was in Saskatoon at the time, city of 250,000, a little less than 250,000, maybe a little more now. And I would go to these networking events and these guys, this is material, but it was how I saw it. I'm like, wow, there's Audi, Mercedes, there's all these beautiful vehicles in this parking lot. I'm like, we're in Saskatoon. Nobody lives here. But in that room of 30, 40 people, most of the people driving to that event were in vehicles like that. And they're wearing nice suits, like tailored suits. They're very successful in their own right. They're all business owners. I was like, wow, in a city of this small, hey? And now in Edmonton, in a city where there's probably almost as many millionaires as there is the population of Saskatoon. And that's not saying Edmonton's better than Saskatoon. That's just statistically, if you did the math, it's probably not far off. Like there's for sure over 100,000 millionaires in and around Edmonton. No questions asked. But that potential was also in that city. It's such small. So, yeah, you might not be around the Ed Milettes and the Andy Frisellas of the world, but regular people can create massive success too. So you don't need to be in this grandiose. It's right in front of you if you look a little deeper. So yeah, like you said, go to Eventbrite, go to that small networking event, that business network that's very specific to your industry, and you'll be around it and you'll see it. And I bet for especially your young advisors, that was some of the biggest takeaways was, whoa, this is a financial event. We didn't even talk about financial stuff for 90% of it. We talked about success. We talked about mindset. We talked about, all this intangible stuff, these soft skills per se. And now everybody's fired up and they want to go and be like the guys that were on stage. So yeah, it's out there. You just got to look.
Absolutely. Yeah. How do you change your relationship with time? How do you change your relationship with money? How do you change your relationship with relationships? How do you unlearn what you've been taught to relearn what you need to learn to not be 9 to 5, $40 an hour forever and start to build life on purpose, with purpose, on your terms. You're in control. You're not asking another grown adult when you can go to the bathroom and when you can take time off to be with your kids. I think that stuff's important because for most people, they think it's out of reach. And I think, Greg, you and I are living proof for people that it's not that out of reach. So, yeah, appreciate you kind of let me free roll that a little bit. I mean, we could probably go on a 3, 4, 5 hour episode just debriefing some stuff, but pulled a few things that I figured would be relevant to our listeners that are not involved with the specifics of what you and I do day to day. And yeah, appreciate the conversation, and we'll see you guys next week.
Same here, brother. Great chat as always. See ya.